So Mika, thanks for joining me and us, everybody on LinkedIn and YouTube, for this amazing and very interesting conversation about what the heck is going on in the workspace. And I'm so excited to have this conversation based on your background, talk about transformation, talk about innovation. But before we get into that, I kind of want to ask you a little bit about your background, and because you're it's so unique in terms of your career and how you've kind of got to where you are. And was there a moment that you can point to that you thought, you know what, the workspace is where I want to focus and I want to do my work and I want to be a change agent there? Was there a moment that made you realize, like, this is my calling, this is what I want to get into? And I know I'm putting you on the spot, people knowing, like, this is a heavy question off the bat and with no prep.
No, I think it's such a great question. And, there are many moments, I believe, that probably led me to where I'm at now. But in terms of inspiring my love and passion for all things workforce and transformation, I'd have to say it would be my life. I started my career in uniform in the United States Army. I enlisted from a small rural town in Maine, and I was 19 years old, didn't really know what adventures I would get into. And from there, served in personnel and administrative kind of roles before I won a full scholarship to become a commissioned officer. And it's funny because I pursued mass communications as my degree program in undergrad, and I thought I was going to be working in public relations and marketing and communications, which was my love and passion. But when I started my first job as a commissioned officer, then I was sort of like the top brass, part of the officer corps, but at the lowest level. I was stationed in an organization and supporting a workforce that was rapidly deployable and had to be prepared and ready to go anywhere at any time. And I really saw the impact on families and spouses, and realized the power of what it meant to support and be flexible, that cadre of folks to be able to do their jobs and their mission by helping also to support their needs and priorities in their families. And so that started, I think, my first interest and passion and work in supporting the workforce in different ways through flexibility and flexible benefits and empathy, kindness, well-being, all of those things, because I could see the impact on the mission. And then when I had my own child, my first child, my daughter, who actually is turning 20 next week, can't even believe it. I was a captain in the Army working in the United States intelligence community with a top secret TSSCI clearance. I was completing my master's degree. Again, I was working in, a multi-pronged, very complex matrixed organization, bureaucratic organization as well, in the intelligence community, and starting my own family. And so I realized, I wanted a different path for myself, not only for my career, but also for my life. And so I decided to take an interest in writing human capital policy and really understanding how the pen would change policy, procedure, and process, and help to communicate those changes in a transformational way to support workers who were going to become new parents, or who had caregiving responsibilities, or who had, involvement in their communities and really had lives outside of work, but also had to get the mission done too. So I think that's where I got my start.
I was not expecting that, and that's amazing. Your inspiration came from this, if I'm understanding correctly, from family and understanding of how anybody does a job, they also have a life outside of the job, and you need to accommodate both. And there isn't the professional version of us and the home version of us. We're one and the same, and have to kind of bridge those things together. And going through that experience yourself, so mom working full time and doing a master's, and then deciding to take on a new policy. That is insane. How did you manage all of those at one time? We've talked about, I'm relatively newer parents and you're kind of giving me some advice in terms of what
I'm
I
an
can do.
OG now.
But I can't imagine juggling all of those things. Is through that experience, did that help you shape like, hey, the workspace needs to be accommodating for people to have a home life so you can show up to work and be the best version of yourself?
Yeah, 100%. In fact, I was very proud of my career in the Army, and had gotten promoted pretty quickly, and felt really honored to be in such a role in such a prestigious organization, again, like the United States intelligence community. But when my daughter was born, I knew that I wanted to be home, and I didn't want to have to expect or ask of my troops things that I didn't want to give up. So I decided to resign my commission and continue working for the United States government in a civilian capacity. And my first job, when I took off the uniform, was in a traditional HR operations role on the employee and management relations side. So really, you had to be an expert in performance management, conduct, leadership, and human capital policy. And so I also was volunteering to rewrite and update all of the antiquated and older human capital policies that our team needed to update. One, because I wanted to become an expert and understand areas of human resources and human capital, maybe that I wasn't necessarily working in, but I had an interest in, and how I could understand how policy would affect the people. And so I took that opportunity to rewrite policies that ultimately I needed as well. So those were, and I mean like back in the day, like 2004 and 2005, those were areas like what we called FlexiPlace at the time in the US government, which was your telework/hybrid work policy. I learned the policy and rewrote it and then communicated it and helped develop training around it. Part-time employment, flexible work schedules, compressed work schedules, regular work schedules that were off, reemployed annuitant programs, which were part-time, sort of seasonal and temporary opportunities. I wanted to learn it all. And then from there, I also worked in work life and wellness, and then also in diversity, equity, and inclusion, in order to understand all the components that could help transform a workplace. So I don't know. I hope that answers your question in some ways, but I was a consumer of the policy myself because it affected my life, but I could also see how it would better the rest of the organization and really impact people in an important way.
I love how you came from a place of, hey, there's got to be a better way to do this for me as someone that's trying to manage, a home life as well as a professional career and do things, and there has to be flexibility. And did you say 2004, 2005 writing policy? So you were doing remote policy before it was cool. I mean, companies now in like, what was it, 2019, 2020, having to do policies for remote. You were 15 years ahead of the curve on doing that. So, let's fast forward to 2020 and everybody now scrambling to figure out how are we going to have a flexible workforce and roll out policy and support people in this way that we've never done before. Through your experience, how has the workplace transformed since 2020? And did anything surprise you given your research and background?
So I've worked not only in the intelligence community, but all throughout the nation's largest employer in places like the United States Department of Agriculture, with more than 150 years of doing things the way they've always done it, for a workforce of more than 100,000 employees in 3,000 different locations around the world and nationally. I've also worked at the Office of Personnel Management, which sets the policies and programs for the federal government, and in places like the US Department of Labor, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, and all that fun stuff. So I've had a lot of experience testing and developing real programs, operations, training, initiatives, and policies for many different cultures, and seeing what works and what doesn't before I went to work for a fully remote company. This was pre-pandemic, called Flex Jobs in 2018, where I serve as Vice President of Employer Engagement, working with employers of all sizes, types, and industries, Fortune 500, 100, nonprofit, academia, mom and pop startups, you name it, who already were remote friendly and remote first and very flexible before the pandemic. So I've had a lot of experience seeing things in action and creating workplace policies and programs and transformational initiatives that have worked and some that have not worked so well. If you are asking me what has surprised me the most, like, I was not surprised that organizations were able to see the benefits fairly quickly of remote and heightened hybrid work posture the way they did. From engagement scores to performance, to bottom line upfront tangible benefits, employee engagement, DEIA benefits. Was I surprised? No. What surprises me the most is that despite all of the benefits, all of the employee feedback, all of the data and research that we've seen over the last 3 years, and the impact to people, and people make it possible, right, for us to create our premier customer experience, to deliver customer service, to achieve our bottom line, our goals, and our mission objectives. What surprises me the most is that still, after all of that, when more than 60% of white collar workers were working fully remote at some point during the height of the pandemic, and we were able to keep people safe and at least mitigate some of the spread of this crazy global pandemic that we were navigating, still after all of that, people are vying to try to go back to the way that we were doing things before the pandemic. That, to me, my friend, is the most surprising of all.
I like how you said that. I mean, I think we had a 3-year sample size of everybody having to work remotely, and the benefits far outweighed the costs or the exercise of enabling that flexible workforce. And now you've done all the work to enable workers to do this. And the response after this is, let's just claw it all back and go backwards. It's like giving the internet and then taking it away 3 years later. It doesn't make sense to me. So I'm glad you said that. In terms of, the surprise is not that it worked. The surprise is that organizations are going the other way. And why do you think organizations are reacting this way and trying to pull back?
Well, I think, you commented on it a little bit as you were adding your thoughts to what my last statement was around. And I think it's that not all organizations have invested the time to develop skill and competency in what it takes to lead in this new environment, newish environment. It's not so new anymore. We didn't have the luxury of time when we were forced into a fully remote or primarily remote or, heightened hybrid environment to begin with at the beginning of the pandemic. But we do have the luxury of time to be thoughtful and to design workforce strategies that really operationalize the heightened flexibility that we can offer. The bottom line is that not all positions are suitable and can be done in a fully work from home / remote environment. In fact, most cannot be done 100% fully remote. However, we can design work around well-being and productivity to create a sense of belonging and community, to develop and enhance DEIA and inclusivity. And we can do that by extending trust and designing work around well-being and autonomy and preference. The challenge is that mindsets trump any kind of ROI, data, research, anything that you put together. If organizational leaders are convinced that work only gets done in a place, and that collaboration and innovation and creativity and connection can only exist in its best form when we're all together in one physical space together, then all else is for naught. We're not going to accomplish much at all. And so I think what you're seeing is that organizations and employers who haven't taken time to invest in changing the culture, addressing the mindset, training to enhance capacity, competency, and skill sets to thrive, not just survive, in this hybrid and also ultra flexible kind of environment. Those are the organizations that are pulling those knee-jerk reactions to back to office strategy and everybody back in. Because if I can see you and I have you under my thumb, that's the easy button, right? I can manage you a little bit better, is that mindset. It is a flawed mindset. And I 100% believe that those organizations that are doing it to the detriment to their own bottom line and their own viability.
I like some of the words you mentioned there, and kind of how you talk about the policy centered around well-being and less about. And I think when a lot of people talk about flexibility, and you've mentioned this to me before, is people go to location flexibility. It's like, well, I can work at home or work in the office. When you think about a policy expanding beyond that, and flexibility is not just where you're based, but the hours you work, how you work, all of these other factors. Can you expand on kind of expanding the term of just being a location-based flexibility and what it can entail for people?
Absolutely. I'm happy to. I have friends at Workplaceless, an amazing training company that developed the term a placeless mindset. I often talk about it in terms of a location independent mindset. And the US Surgeon General just published a framework around 5 workplace essentials that are required to cultivate a healthy workplace that focuses on mental health, well-being, resilience. And one of those elements is work-life harmony. So our US Surgeon General can see the tie-in between the way we run our workplaces and our own physical and emotional and mental well-being. So when you think about and consider the level of flexibility that you can offer, also consider the diversity of your workforce. We have 5 generations of workers typically working together at any one time. Those different generational differences come into play with how people prefer to engage and communicate, how they wish to come together. So when it's appropriate, whether that be virtually or in a physical space, how people feel a sense of belonging and community in order to avoid workplace stress, anxiety, burnout, loneliness, you name it. And when organizations are thinking about bringing in early career new talent to their organizations, consider that Gen Z and millennials are the loneliest generation. They are the most digitally connected. They are the most technology savvy generations that we have, and they are also struggling. They are the most lonely. So how we cultivate a culture that can embrace connections, comfort, care, that discretionary effort that says, I'm going to lean in and help Mike when he's struggling on a project, or I'm going to volunteer to take on a little more of this project, even though it might not be in my particular area. That helps avoid things like the phenomenon that we're hearing about with quiet quitting and the great resignation. Turnover will also impact your bottom line quite clearly if you don't have people to make your mission possible. So I think the focus on ultra work-life balance, which in my opinion, balance is the wrong terminology, right? It's around integration, as you mentioned in the very beginning. Work affects life, life affects work. So as much as possible, workplaces that embrace all sorts of flexibility to meet people where they're at so they can bring their best to work wherever it may be location-wise, whenever it might be schedule-wise, and then focusing on outcomes and results is something that's going to really empower an engaged workforce overall and affect the bottom line.
The term flexibility keeps coming up, and I think that that's an important thing to hone in on, because I mean, if you think about just, you have a relationship with your employer as an organization. That's a relationship. A relationship is unique. It requires work. It requires flexibility, and how I have a relationship with an employer is going to be different with a colleague has a relationship, and that customization and focus around wellness is key. And you mentioned kind of the 5 generations that are involved, and a lot of them working for the same organization need different things from flexibility and what that means to them. So in some ways it's easy, right? But in other ways I can see it being challenging, because how do you write a policy that the policy is, well, it depends on who it is? Like, is that the struggle people are having? Is like, I get it. We have to, I guess, customize how we let each other kind of work and how they represent themselves, but how do we write a policy around that if we're a larger company? Is that kind of part of the challenge?
Oh, yeah, that's a significant challenge, especially for new to hybrid organizations who are struggling with like, what's the right mix of in office and remote work, capabilities. I think it's position, dependent. It's a little bit person dependent, and it's also preferential dependent. It depends on people's preferences as well. What organizations need to be doing is thinking about the right kinds of investments, though, to help leaders make those right decisions that aren't subjective, but are around mission and business outcomes. It's really challenging to do that, right? But it does take a new skill set and a set of competencies that you can learn and adapt in order to create a hyper flexible workplace that still meets the mission and that delivers results as well, while taking care of the people that are performing the work for you. Organizations that get that right are, again, they're investing time in building culture change, community, and also training for every level of the organization, but most especially for middle managers and senior leader executives.
I feel like that's a big gap. And something we've talked about before is just, it's a new skill set for management of a remote workforce, or some remote, some not. Even managing a team that comprises of 5 different generations of individuals, there isn't a lot of training on how to do that and how to meet people where they are and make sure that they're getting what they need to thrive in the workplace. So do you see that as an opportunity for organizations to invest in how to manage the new workforce?
I do, absolutely. And I think, what you said about the training is correct. The challenge is that you can't just take one, off the shelf kind of training and have it be a one size fits all solution for every organization, because there are microcultures within your organization. Different teams operate differently. You might have place-based positions. I mean, think about law enforcement positions that are required to be on site, inspectors, just so many healthcare jobs that cannot be performed from a distance and that are customer facing. In the same organization, you might have, your budget, finance, HR, marketing teams that can be. And so how can you extend a level of trust, autonomy, grace, and choice over not just where, but again, when and how you perform work? That is going to be key. So those investments look a little different, right? Like the customization of how you deliver the best tips, tools, resources that can work in a blended, uber flexible environment is going to be extremely essential for succeeding in the new future of work.
Agreed completely. And to that point, as we kind of move forward in this, how does attracting and retaining talent change now that the workspace or workplace has also changed? Like, does the approach in terms of how you go about messaging that or reaching individuals that you want to fit into the culture you have you seen a change in that given where we are?
It's been really fascinating to watch all of the trends and research around this. In fact, I paid close attention to LinkedIn global talent trends, of course, Flex Jobs survey data, and the Future Forum consortium of data research and insights that really collect global input through their post survey data. And if there's one thing I'm seeing across all research arms and collection around the data, is that workers are looking for flexibility and choice. In fact, work-life balance is really trumping bank balance at the moment. So people have had time to sort of recalibrate their priorities. Company culture is having a watershed moment. And we're at this point where workers are willing to vote with their feet. So what does that mean? In terms of recruiting and hiring, the best that employers can do to clearly state the kinds of flexible work options and benefits that are available in plain language and use it as part of your recruitment branding and recruitment marketing strategies, that's going to get you a higher level and higher caliber of reach to talent markets that maybe you wouldn't have reached before. think about caregivers, think about working parents, working mothers who were very disadvantaged, especially single working mothers. And I have a special place in my heart for those demographics of workers, and those in rural communities that traditionally have had challenges and barriers to employment. You're going to be able to reach a different demographic of worker when you expand your flexible work options. And again, not just flexibility in location, but other elements as well: work schedules, work shifts, compressed work schedules, alternate work schedules, part-time, seasonal, intermittent, you name it. Those are going to get different kinds of talent pool in the door and expand your diversity hiring as well.
Yeah, I'm with you in the excitement around this. Is it opens up talent markets, whereas like you're not limited anymore, and people think that, oh great, I was hiring a certain type of engineer or individual white collar worker in New York. Now that we're remote, I can hire this person in any market. It's like, well, you can also expand behind what your criteria is and make the market even bigger and seek potential there. So it's a massive opportunity to just reach talent groups that were disadvantaged before and kind of didn't have the same opportunities. So it should be a great opportunity. Are you seeing organizations market that talent effectively and doing that, or are they still trying to figure out how the best way is to reach these new talent pools?
I think they're trying. I'm especially proud of the United States government, the federal government level, which really is optimizing remote work options in new and different ways. In fact, on their talent platform, usajobs.gov, there is a fully remote option that job seekers can actually search for. So not only can you search by keyword and occupational category and geographic location, but you can also search for federal government positions that are advertised as fully remote. So yay for that, nation's largest employer. It's really great to see. I think the challenge for job seekers, though, is in terminology and lexicon, because not all employers use the term remote or virtual or work from home or hybrid in the same way to mean the same things. So for instance, on the FlexJob site, they offer job seekers a way to access fully vetted, researched, and verified employers who offer all sorts of flexible work options. And so we have categories there that look like fully remote positions versus partially remote or hybrid kinds of roles versus work from anywhere. Because even if employers are offering a remote kind of position, there still may be geographic restrictions based on tax law or employment policy that they have to follow. So I think that's a challenge globally in terms of how job seekers are expecting to connect with a fully work from home position from anywhere, where they can sort of serve as a digital nomad and travel and take their work with them, versus work from home positions that are geographically restricted because of employment law, tax, those sorts of things, requirements. I think we're getting better at it, and employers certainly are catching on that, hey, if they are promoting the different kinds of flexibilities that job seekers want, they're going to get a higher level of candidate engagement and recruitment actions.
Also, I want to comment on a previous thing you said, because it made me smile, is where people are voting with their feet in terms of walking. And like me and my dad brain of lack of sleep, it took me that long to realize like that. And I had a moment that I was just like, oh, that's clever. That's really funny. So, but I think you're right. And I think, it's just like the flexible nature. There's no standardization for what those terms are, where everybody's trying to figure it out. So it's confusing sometimes. I was having a conversation earlier where someone was searching, and it's like, she's like, I don't think any of these companies are offering fully remote. And I was like, well, are there other words they use? And we kind of went through it, and it was like, well, that could mean a few different things. You kind of have to have the conversation to figure it out, which is a shame that you have to go through the process just to see what they're defining as what their policy is. Whereas it would be easier if there was a universal term for what all of those were, just to make it easier for people to navigate that.
I agree.
I have a couple more things I want to get yet. I know I'm taking a lot of your time, but I want to know, what innovation in the workspace are you most excited about that's either coming or is here and just gets you excited and makes you feel optimistic about the future of work?
Oh, goodness. Innovation. If I had to pick just one, I really think that, the ability to tap talent markets in rural communities globally, but also in the United States, especially in marginalized communities that have been left behind and dissipated by certain industries leaving, is an innovative approach to workforce strategy that I'm super excited about. I mean, coming from a rural state like Maine, there was not a whole lot of opportunity for me to be able to stay put in the area that I was currently living in. And so this is really causing, or has caused, a brain drain in rural communities globally, but especially in the United States, where people are going to where the jobs are because the jobs aren't coming to them. That really affects community development. It affects community viability. It affects sustainability issues, and that leveling of the playing field by bringing more flexible and remote job opportunities to communities that otherwise wouldn't have had access to it is helping to reverse the rural brain drain. And I'm super excited to see what that can mean for local communities, counties, states, and rural regions overall.
I threw that question at you, not knowing where that would go, and of course you tie it back to the heart and the family and communities, and I love that. And I was nodding the whole time you were saying it because like I love that, and I agree, and I'm hopeful for that as well. Like I'm hoping now people don't have to physically go to the city, quote unquote, to get a job. The jobs can come to the communities and they can stay, and those communities can thrive, without having to leave to do that. So I love that. And finally, I want you to kind of comment on if you're an organization that is either struggling or facing challenges with a remote, and we'll say location remote policy,
Mm-hmm.
what would be your advice for them, in terms of either increasing adoption or getting over the hurdle and the challenges about staying and fighting that fight to keep the workforce kind of flexible and remote?
I would say first, try it before you knock it and extend trust first and then hold accountability later. So often people are just really scared and nervous about like, well, what if I let people have this hybrid approach that allows them to choose which days they want to come in and when? If you are designing work in place around a purpose, it will come together. If you are investing the right kinds of tools, skills, competencies, training, and culture pieces in your workforce to make it work, those things are going to be evolving. It's not a one and done approach. And you can even benchmark from some of the best remote first, remote friendly organizations that existed well before the pandemic to get some great ideas and suggestions. FlexJobs is a great company to benchmark as well as all the employers there that they work with on a constant basis. I think looking at like comprised industries and occupations for best and promising practices is smart. Instilling a continuous feedback cycle and approach to listening, responding to, and working with collaboratively your workforce, the people that actually are getting your objectives met for your business goals, is incredibly powerful and important. And, you got to make the right investments, and the market is speaking. This is the hands down, I think we are in the midst of the most radical change and transformation to the way that we work, a once in a generation experience. So you can take all of the wonderful things that have happened and apply them to your future strategy. But it does take an evolution. It takes an approach to the evolving, changing nature of work, and also those investments in time, resources, policy. And there are so many experts out here that can help you. So I just suggest that you start somewhere because it's going to make a huge difference when you're thinking about your talent, workforce, and succession planning strategies looking forward.
Amazing. And I wanted to talk about something earlier, and you reminded me during that, is when you look for best practices and you're looking for organizations that do it, there's a lot of noise about Twitter, for instance, calling everybody back to the office. So there's that narrative going around where you have these companies that people look up to and aspire to be like that are going against this and mandating organizations to come back. Do you have any comments on that trend that's going on, and what does that mean to the market, and does it cause confusion with, well, what is the best practice if there are some bigger companies, tech companies that are forward thinking that are pulling this back in? Like, how is that shaking things up a little bit?
I absolutely think we've seen this before. If you remember Yahoo and Marissa Mayer, which was all the rage, back in the 2000s, where that was a big to do in every event, every keynote, every training that I gave 10, 20 years ago, I would always hear these questions. Well, what about Yahoo? Well, what about this tech company? What about Best Buy, who were retracting their results only work environment and flexible work policies? I mean, again, there's not a one size fits all approach to your culture. I suggest that you keep pace and bookmark and see what's going to happen to companies like Twitter who are pulling the rug under remote work. I think you're going to see a huge impact to the way that workers are going to feel and experience those workplaces. And word of mouth is powerful, right? Like the Glassdoor approach. It is a part of your employer brand. So there's got to be a happy medium. And I think it's going to really revolutionize the way that we consider work and what work is and how we'll perform it moving forward. But this, just like everything else, is a trend, and I suspect it'll pass rather quickly.
Mika, I could talk to you all day because I'm learning so much. My notebook is full, and I'm sure everybody else that's listening to this also is. To close things out, where can people connect with you and follow along with all of the gems of content that you provide?
Thanks for asking. Yeah, I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So I'm happy to link with anyone who would like to share networks and collaborate that way. I also have a website. It's just mikacross.com. Easy way to follow me there. And then on Twitter. Those are my most used social platforms. I'm only one person and a mom, so there's only so much I can do. But, I'm happy to share resources, content, and I'm always available to come and talk to organizations like you, in fact, Mike. Or at your events. So happy to give you resources and references for all things future of work.
Amazing. You will see the links to all of Mika's, her website, her LinkedIn, and her Twitter below in the show notes. So Mika, thank you so much for joining us this week. I've learned so much, and I'm sure everybody else did as well. And for those listening, that is a wrap on 2022. Hired. So thanks for following along this season. I couldn't think of a better host to end this. I feel like we should have like a New Year's ball drop or something to just like close out 2022. But thanks so much, and we will see everybody next year.